Hello, my name is Professor John Benjamin, and this is After Effects. So when you open After Effects, hopefully the interface looks like this, and you can create a new composition by either clicking on this button or going to Composition and New Composition. Let's give it a good name. I'm going to call this Animated Logo. And there's the presets. This is a good preset to start with, 1920 by 1080 pixels at 29.97 frames per second. Lastly, let's go choose the duration. I'm going to choose 3 seconds. All right, hit OK. Here's your stage. Here is your project panel where you keep your assets. And here's the timeline and the layers palette. And then over here are your tool palettes. So I'm going to animate a PNG. You can select any PNG. I'm going to bring in my logo, dragging it in from a folder into my project panel. And then from my project panel, I can simply drag it on to the stage. Okay, so let's look at some ways we can manipulate this in our timeline. So if we come down here, you can see in the layers palette, there's my PNG, and I can open up the transform options down here, and I can transform or animate all of these different parameters. Now, eventually, if you have many objects at play that you're animating, it gets really complicated. So the first key command I want to show you is the letter U. So the letter U will just close all that right up really quickly. This is going to be really important if you've got a lot of things at play. The next thing I want to point out is a few other key commands, because sometimes we only want to animate some of these parameters. So for instance, P is just going to isolate just position. T is going to isolate opacity, S for scale, and R for rotation. So let's focus first on P. So I'm going to hit the letter P on my keyboard. And so we're just going to animate position. So this is my timeline, my time bar, and this is here, this blue thing is called the CTI, or current time indicator. So I'm going to move my CTI up to 5 frames. I'm going to come down to the position parameter here and click on the stopwatch. That gives me a keyframe. I'm going to move my CTI up to 20 frames. And then I'm going to come over here to add a new keyframe, this add and remove keyframe button right here. I've got 2 keyframes. If I slide my CTI, nothing's happening because I haven't changed the parameters. I haven't changed the position. I've just added 2 keyframes. So I want to move to this keyframe. To make sure I'm aligned with the keyframe, it's a good habit to use these 2 arrows. Rather than sliding it near it, you might be off a little bit. So we want to use these arrows here to make sure we're right on the keyframe. Otherwise, what will happen is a new keyframe will be created. So there's the position, and I want to move it over here. I can just click and drag it, and you can see there's the animated timeline. But what I really like to do, I'm going to undo this, is what's called scrubbing. So here, I'm just going to scrub by clicking and dragging on that number. That way I get a little bit more precision in my parameters. All right, and so now if I move my CTI, you can see you've animated it. This is called a tween. And I can play this by going up here to preview and hitting the play button. And there it is. Now it's a little mechanical. So what I want to do is change a couple of parameters to make it a little more lifelike. The first parameter we're going to talk about is easy ease. And this is a basic principle of movement in physics. So if a car or a person is, let's say a person is going to start running, they start off slow, they get faster, and then they slow down before they stop. And that's what we're going to do here. And we're going to do this using the graph editor. So I'm going to select these 2 anchor points. I can click one and shift click the other, or I can lasso select the 2. And then I'm going to hit this button right here, which is the graph editor. And so here you have the Y position, and here's the X position. So you can see just basically the speed from this anchor point to this anchor point is just linear. All right, so we want to change that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little anchor point up here, and then I'm going to come down to this button here. It's called Separate Dimensions. And now I'm going to have little handlebars here, and I'm going to move this handlebar up and this handlebar down, creating what's called an S-curve. All right, so now let's play our animation, and you can see that's what's happening. It starts off slow, gets fast, and then slows down before it stops. A little bit more natural looking. All right, and we can manipulate these even further. If I wanted to be more of an exaggerated movement, I can really drag this one up and make this curve a lot steeper. Well, let's try that. All right, that's super fun. A little more exaggerated. All right, so let's turn the graph editor off. And then now what's happened is you can see that the X and the Y position now each have keyframes. So the next thing I want to do to really give this animation some life is to add what's called motion blur. So over here in the timeline, we have some switches. Now, if you don't see all the switches, you just right click in the timeline where it says same source here, and you can say columns, and then you can turn on different options down here in the layers palette. And so here is the motion blur. So with this logo, if I click motion blur, everything now that moves will have a little bit of blur on it. So let's play that. Oh, pardon me. One thing I should point out is this little green line here. This is your cache. So if you have a slower computer or your computer has a lot of different things going on, it might take a little while for that cache to fill up. And you won't be able to play back your animation until that green bar is fully filled in. All right, so let's try this again. All right, we're going to hit play. And there you can see it. Now this is another principle of vision. When things move fast and we see them, they appear to blur. And so if I move the CTI really slowly, you can see that's what's happening. And the blur is increasing with the sine curve that we created. All right, and that's a really nice animation. Okay, so now after we save it, let's go ahead here and save it. Now let's go ahead and export it. So you can export in several different ways, but there's really only one way that we want to get in the habit of doing. So if I go to File and I say Export, I get several options here. I can add it to the render queue, and that's just going to create a .mov file. What I want to do is open up Adobe Media Encoder. It's a good idea to open it up ahead of time, but it should open up on its own. So I'm going to click on this. And here's my Media Encoder. It's a separate Adobe program that allows us to pick lots of different codecs and file types. So I already have this preloaded as an H.264 that will create an animated logo as an MP4, which is a really flexible file type. Now I want to click on this to make sure I put it in the right place. So for today, I think I'm going to put it on my desktop. So I can find it easily. So I'm going to click here and just simply select my desktop. All right, so I know where it's going. Now I may also want to export this as a different file type, which I do. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on this and I'm going to click on this little duplicate button. And now it's going to export two files. But in this case, I don't want an H.264, I want an animated GIF. So now it's going to export those two files. I'm going to hit play. And then here it gives me a little output preview. All right, and then if I look in my desktop here, you can see I've got an animated GIF and an MP4. So I can double click on the MP4. All right, we can watch that play. And if you want to play an animated GIF, the easiest way to do it is in a browser. So I'm just going to open up Google Chrome. And then I'm just going to drag this animated GIF into Google Chrome. And then there you can see it. All right, and that's how that's done. Now, one of the things you will notice is they both, on my stage here, I have a white background. And in that export, they have a black background and a gray background. So essentially, if you don't give any background to your animation, it's going to export as transparent or possibly black. And so just what you'll want to do then is you'll want to come up here to Layer and say New, and let's create a new solid layer. And here you can pick the color. So this looks like a crazy bright blue. I'm just going to pick something like a light gray. Well, something we can notice about like a slight gray yellow color. Okay, and then hit OK. And then you'll need to drag that to the bottom. So I've got this pale yellow solid. I'll drag it to the bottom. And now when I export this animation, this background color will be there. All right, so that's all for this first introductory tutorial in After Effects, and we'll pick up with some more animation tips in the next episode.